The desert doesn't offer last chances. It offers sun-bleached bones, and the whisper of the wind telling tales of those who fell. For Amelia Clare, a woman living on the edge of nowhere, it was her unforgiving neighbor. But on a night painted in twilight indigo, she stumbled upon a man whose life was guttering out like a cheap candle. He was a warrior heir to the most powerful clan in the territory, the Blackwoods, and the venom of a bark scorpion was turning his blood to fire. With nothing but her knowledge of old-world remedies and sheer grit, she fought the poison all night. She saved a dying warrior. But she never could have imagined the price of her mercy. By morning, when his father, the formidable Ronan Blackwood, laid eyes on her, he saw not a savior, but a solution, and with a voice that could crack stone, he declared her the clan's new bride. The sun bled out across the horizon, painting the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains in hues of blood orange and violet. And this was Amelia Clare's world, a landscape of stark, brutal beauty, a place that tolerated life, but never nurtured it. Her small adobe and timber cabin was nestled in a shallow arroyo, a deliberate retreat from a world that had cast her out. She was a healer, or a hedge witch, as the good folk of dusty Tucson whispered, after the fever took her parents a sickness her poultices and tinctures couldn't defeat. Guilt had become her shadow, and solitude her penance. Tonight the wind carried a different sound. It wasn't the usual cry of a coyote, or the skittering of unseen things. It was a human sound, a low, guttural groan of pure agony that sliced through the evening calm. Every instinct screamed at her to bar the door and ignore it. The desert was full of men who were better off left to their fates. But the sound was raw, desperate. It was the sound she had heard in her father's throat in his final hours. With a heavy sigh, she grabbed her leather satchel of herbs and a water skin, pulling her shawl tight against the coming chill. She followed the sound her worn boots sure-footed on the rocky ground. She found him 20 minutes later, collapsed near a cluster of prickly pear cactus. He was built like the mountains themselves, broad shoulders, a frame hardened by a life of combat, his dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. A finely tooled leather vest and silver conchos on his belt marked him as a man of means, a man of power. He belonged to the Blackwood clan, the iron-fisted rulers of this territory, whose sprawling ranch controlled the only reliable river for 100 miles. And he was dying. His body was rigid, seized by violent tremors. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. Amelia's eyes, trained to see what others missed, scanned his body. She saw it on his left hand, which was swollen to twice its normal size, and turning a dark, angry purple. 2 tiny puncture marks, the telltale sign of the Arizona bark scorpion. It was the devil's own creature, its venom a neurotoxin that didn't just kill, it tortured. "Hold still," she commanded, her voice surprisingly firm. The man's eyes, a startling fever, bright grey, flickered open. They were clouded with pain, but in them she saw a flicker of defiance, of a will that refused to be extinguished. "Who?" He rasped, his jaw clenched against another wave of convulsions. "Someone who isn't going to let you die tonight," she stated, already working. She didn't have the luxury of anti-venom. Her medicine was the earth. She pulled a wicked-looking knife from her belt and, without hesitation, made a small, shallow X over the bite marks. She ignored his sharp intake of breath and pressed down, forcing a slurry of venom and dark blood from the wound. Next, from her satchel, she pulled out a small clay pot containing a thick, dark paste of crushed echinacea and clay. "This is going to burn," she warned, smearing the poultice over the wound. He let out a strangled cry as it touched his skin. While the poultice worked to draw out the poison, she addressed the true enemy, the venom already coursing through his veins. She gathered brittle creosote branches, their resinous, earthy smell filling the air. She needed to make a strong tea, a purgative to help his body fight. But for that, she needed a fire, and she needed to get him back to her cabin. He was a large man, and she was one woman alone against the dying of the light. "Can you stand?" she asked. He tried pushing himself up with his one good arm, his muscles cording with effort, before he collapsed back with a curse. "No." He ground out his body, arching as another tremor racked his frame. Amelia looked from the dying man to the encroaching darkness. A choice had been made the moment she'd left her cabin. She looped her arm under his, taking on his dead weight, her own smaller frame straining. "We're not dying out here," she gritted out more to herself than to him. "Not tonight." Dragging the proud, dying warrior of the Blackwood clan, she began the slow, agonizing journey back to her home, one painful step at a time. The long night had just begun. The journey back to the cabin was a brutal ordeal. Caelan Blackwood, he'd managed to gasp out his name in a moment of lucidity, was a dead weight, his body, a pendulum of limp surrender and violent muscle-ripping spasms. Amelia's shoulders screamed in protest. Her lungs burned with the effort, but she pushed on, fueled by a stubbornness born from a lifetime of being underestimated. Inside the single room of her cabin was a sanctuary of flickering candlelight and the scent of dried herbs. She managed to get him onto her simple cot, his large frame overwhelming it. His fever was raging now. His skin was slick with sweat, yet he shivered uncontrollably. His grey eyes, when they focused on her, were filled with a delirious storm. "They left me." He mumbled, his mind lost somewhere between the present and the ambush that had left him here. The McAllisters. Cowards. Amelia paid his words, little mind her focus absolute. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. She crushed creosote leaves and jimson weed, a dangerous plant, but in the right dose, a powerful antispasmodic, into her small iron pot, adding water from her barrel. As it simmered over the fire, she tended to him, wiping his brow with a cool, damp cloth. "Drink," she ordered, lifting his head and pressing a cup of the bitter tea to his lips. He coughed and sputtered, but she was relentless, ensuring he swallowed most of it. His body needed to fight, and she was merely giving it the weapons. The hours bled into one another, a long, desperate battle waged in the quiet of the night. The cabin became a crucible. Caelan drifted in and out of consciousness. In his delirium he spoke of his father Ronan, his words a tangled mix of reverence and resentment. He spoke of duty of a betrothal to a woman named Isabella Thorne, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. And in brief, lucid moments, his gaze would find Amelia, a question in his pain-filled eyes. "Why?" He managed to ask, his voice a raw whisper, as she changed the poultice on his hand. Amelia didn't look up from her work, because no one deserves to die alone in the dirt, at the mercy of something so small and full of hate. Her answer was simple, honest, and it seemed to settle something in him. Around the third hour the convulsions worsened. His back arched off the cot, a terrible, inhuman sound tearing from his throat. His heart was failing. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to pierce Amelia's composure. This was the turning point. He would either break the fever, or the fever would break him. She acted on pure instinct, straddling his waist, pinning his flailing arms with her knees. She placed her hands firmly on his chest. "Breathe," she yelled, her voice ringing in the small space. "You are Caelan Blackwood. You will not be beaten by this. Breathe with me, now." She pressed down on his chest with each of her own exaggerated breaths, trying to will a rhythm back into his body. It was intimate, desperate, and strangely powerful. Under her hands, She could feel the frantic, failing beat of his heart. She closed her eyes, pouring all her will, all her focus into this one man, this stranger. And then, slowly, miraculously, the frantic rhythm began to steady. The arch in his back lessened. The violent tremors subsided into a fine shiver. His breathing, though still labored, deepened. He had passed through the eye of the storm. Exhausted, Amelia slumped against him for a moment, the adrenaline leaving her weak and trembling. She had done it. She had stared death in the face and forced it to blink. As the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pearl and rose, Kaelin's fever finally broke. His breathing was even, his sleep deep and natural. Amelia, covered in grime and sweat, sat in her lone wooden chair, watching him. In the soft morning light, the harsh lines of pain on his face had softened. He looked younger, more vulnerable. He was not just a Blackwood warrior, he was a man who had been given back his life. She must have dozed off for the next thing she knew. The sound of hoofbeats, many of them, jolted her awake. They were loud, close stopping right outside her cabin. The door burst open, and the doorway was filled by a man who seemed to block out the sun. He was older than Kaelin, with the same strong build and steely grey eyes, but his were harder, colder etched with a lifetime of command. His hair was streaked with silver, and his face was a mask of grim authority. He was flanked by a half-dozen hard-faced men, all armed, all wearing the Blackwood brand. This was Ronan Blackwood, the patriarch. His gaze swept the room, taking in the scattered herbs, the simmering pot, and finally landing on his son, asleep, but breathing on the cot. A flicker of something relief, perhaps, crossed his face, before it was replaced by an iron mask of control. His eyes then moved to Amelia, and they held no warmth, only a piercing, calculating assessment. He took a step into the cabin, his presence sucking the air from the room. He walked to the cot and placed a hand on Kaelin's forehead. "His fever is broken," Amelia said, her voice raspy with exhaustion. "The poison has passed its peak. He will live." Ronan Blackwood turned his full attention to her. He looked at her disheveled state, the dirt on her face, the strength in her tired eyes. He saw not a woman, but a resource, an asset, a miracle worker who had saved the future of his clan. And in that moment, a decision formed in his mind as hard and unyielding as the land he ruled. "You saved my son," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "You have performed a great service for the Blackwood clan. A debt of this magnitude cannot be repaid with coin." He took another step towards her, his shadow falling over her. His men shifted their hands, resting on their pistols. "My son, the heir to all this," he said, gesturing vaguely to the world outside, "was nearly taken. Fate, it seems, has intervened. It has placed you in his path." He paused, his grey eyes locking onto hers. "It has chosen for us." Amelia's heart began to pound, a cold dread creeping up her spine. This was not gratitude. This was something else entirely. Ronan Blackwood looked from her to his living son, and made his proclamation, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "You are no longer Amelia Clare, the outcast healer. From this day forward, you are the promised bride of the Blackwood heir. You will marry my son." The silence that followed Ronan Blackwood's decree was heavier than a tombstone. Amelia stared at him, certain she had misheard, that the exhaustion and the lingering stress of the night were playing tricks on her mind. But the patriarch's face was a mask of unshakable resolve. He had not made a suggestion. He had passed a sentence. "No." The word escaped her lips, small and breathless. "You don't understand. I helped him. That's all." One of Ronan's men chuckled a low, humorless sound that was quickly silenced by a glare from his boss. Ronan's eyes narrowed on Amelia. I understand perfectly. You possess a skill that is invaluable. You saved the bloodline. In our world, a life for a life is the old law. A life of service for the life of my son is what is owed. Marriage binds you to us. It ensures your loyalty. It ensures your skills remain with the Blackwood clan. Before she could protest further, two of the men moved. It wasn't rough, but it was firm and undeniable. One gathered her meager belongings, her satchel of herbs, her knife, a few spare clothes. The other, gently but insistently, guided her out of the cabin she had called home for years. She looked back at Kalen, still sleeping oblivious to the fact that his life and hers had just been bartered away. The ride to the Blackwood ranch was a blur. She was placed on a horse and surrounded by the clan's riders, a prisoner in all but name. The ranch itself was less a homestead and more a fortress. A massive two-story main house, built of river stone and dark timber, stood at the center of a sprawling compound, surrounded by bunkhouses, stables, and a high adobe wall. It was a testament to the Blackwood power, a declaration of dominance carved into the heart of the desert. Amelia was led not to a guest room, but to a large, well-appointed chamber on the second floor of the main house. It had a soft bed with a thick quilt, a polished wooden wardrobe, and a window with actual glass panes that overlooked the entire valley. It was more luxury than she had ever known, and it felt like the most opulent prison cell in the world. A young, nervous housemaid named Clara was assigned to her, instructed to bring her food, water, and anything else she required, except, of course, her freedom. Later that day, Kalen was brought back, carried on a litter by 4 men. He was conscious now, weak but lucid. Amelia watched from her window as he was taken into the house, his confused and weary eyes scanning the compound before disappearing inside. The confrontation came that evening. Amelia had refused the food. Clara brought her stomach a tight knot of anxiety and fury. There was a knock on her door, and Ronan Blackwood entered, followed by a man she presumed was the clan's doctor, a portly, balding man with a perpetually skeptical expression. "Dr. Miles has examined my son," Ronan began without preamble. "He confirms the scorpion bite. He also confirms that by all medical logic, Kalen should be dead. He says your methods were unorthodox, primitive, but he cannot argue with the result. He needed his body to fight the poison, not be weakened by chemicals," Amelia said flatly. Ronan waved a dismissive hand. "The details are irrelevant. The outcome is all that matters." He stepped closer, his presence once again dominating the room. "You will be given everything you need. Fine clothes, good food protection. You will be a Blackwood. In return, you will share your knowledge with Dr. Miles. And you will prepare for your wedding." The fury that had been simmering in Amelia finally boiled over. "I will not be your property. I am not a broodmare or a medicine woman to be bought and traded. I saved your son's life out of common decency, not to be shackled to him." For the first time, Ronan's iron composure cracked with a sliver of anger. Decency in this land. Decency is a luxury that gets you killed. Honor, debt, and power are the only currencies that matter. I am honoring you with the highest position a woman can hold in this territory. You were a pariah living in a hovel. I am making you a queen. You should be grateful. Gratitude is earned, not demanded, she shot back, and freedom is not something I am willing to trade. Their standoff was interrupted by a new voice, sharp and laced with venom. "Father, what is the meaning of this? Why is she here?" A woman stood in the doorway, her beauty as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. She was dressed in a gown of dark green silk that must have cost more than Amelia's entire cabin. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, and her blue eyes were fixed on Amelia with pure, unadulterated loathing. Behind her stood a stern-faced man in a tailored suit, her father Silas Thorne. Ronan's expression hardened. "Isabella, this is Amelia Clare, the woman who saved Caelan's life." Isabella Thorne laughed, a sound utterly devoid of mirth. "Saved him? This dusty stray, I heard she was some kind of witch, and you've brought her into our home. She is to be Caelan's wife." Ronan stated his voice, daring anyone to challenge him. The colour drained from Isabella's face, replaced by a mask of incandescent rage. Her father Silas stepped forward, his face flushed. "Ronan, have you lost your mind? The agreement between the Blackwoods and the Thorns has stood for a year. Our families are to be joined. My daughter is Caelan's betrothed." "Circumstances have changed, Silas," Ronan said coldly. "An alliance for land is one thing. But this woman," he gestured to Amelia, "saved the future of my line. Fate has made a claim. My decision is final." Isabella took a step towards Amelia, her silk dress rustling like a snake in dry leaves. She looked Amelia up and down, her lip curled in disgust. "You think you can just wander out of the desert and take what is mine? You have no idea the forces you are playing with, little witch. You will not have him." Amelia stood her ground, meeting the other woman's hateful gaze without flinching. "I don't want him," she said, her voice low and steady. "I want to be left alone." But as she looked from Ronan's immutable face to Isabella's burning hatred, she knew that was the one thing she would never be again. She was trapped a pawn in a game she never asked to play, in a gilded cage built from a debt she never intended to incur. And somewhere else in the great stone house, the man at the center of it all was just beginning to understand the chaos his near death had wrought. The Blackwood Ranch became a cauldron of simmering tension. Amelia was a ghost in the great house, moving through its halls like an unwelcome spirit. The staff treated her with a mixture of awe and fear, whispering about the desert witch who had cheated death and stolen the air. Clara, the young maid, was her only source of timid kindness, leaving food by her door and speaking to her in hushed, nervous tones. Amelia's true prison, however, was not the walls of the ranch, but the unyielding will of Ronan Blackwood. He insisted she spend her afternoons with Dr. Miles, a daily exercise in futility. The doctor was a man of science and scalpels, and he viewed Amelia's herbal remedies with disdain, calling them folk nonsense, even as he grudgingly documented them at Ronan's command. The Jimson weed could have stopped his heart. He'd scoff, but it stopped the convulsions. Amelia would reply calmly, refusing to be baited. Her most formidable adversary, however, was Isabella Thorne. The woman had not left the ranch as Amelia had hoped. Instead, she and her father had taken up residence, a constant, poisonous presence. Isabella missed no opportunity to remind Amelia of her place. She would mock Amelia's simple, practical clothes, the only ones she would wear despite the silks Ronan had provided, and make cutting remarks about her dirt farmer manners at the tense, silent dinners that had become a nightly ritual. "Do tell us, Miss Clare," Isabella purred one evening, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What is the proper etiquette for dining when your plate is usually a flat rock?" Amelia simply met her gaze and continued to eat her silence, a more potent weapon than any retort. Caelan was recovering slowly. He was up and walking, his strength returning, but a deep, troubled silence had settled over him. He was caught in an impossible position. He felt a profound, life-altering debt to Amelia, a debt he could feel in every breath he took. When he looked at her, he saw the flickering candlelight of her cabin. He felt the cool cloth on his brow. He heard her fierce voice commanding him to breathe. It was a bond forged in fire and pain, more real than any political contract. Yet he was also a man of duty. The alliance with the Thorns was meant to secure the Blackwood Eastern Territories against the land-hungry McAllisters. To break it would be to invite conflict. He sought Amelia out a few days after the confrontation with Isabella, finding her in the small herb garden she had started in a neglected patch of dirt behind the kitchens. "I never thanked you properly," he began, his voice rough. Amelia continued to crumble soil between her fingers. "You don't owe me thanks. You owe me my freedom." "It's not that simple," he said, frustration clear in his tone. "My father, once he decides something, the mountains themselves would move sooner. So I am to be a prisoner here because your father is stubborn?" she asked, finally looking up at him. Her eyes were clear and direct, challenging him. "You are the heir, his son. Does your voice mean nothing?" The question struck a nerve. Caelan had always lived in his father's formidable shadow, following orders upholding the family name. The idea of open defiance was almost unthinkable. "It means I have a duty to my family, to our people. And what about your duty to the woman who saved your life?" she countered softly. Their conversation was cut short by a commotion from the stables. A boy no older than 10, one of the stable hands, had been kicked by a spooked stallion. His arm was bent at a sickening angle, a shard of bone threatening to pierce the skin. Dr. Miles was summoned, but he was miles away in the small settlement, delivering a baby. The boy was screaming, his mother weeping beside him. The ranch hands stood around, helpless. Without a second thought, Amelia ran to the scene. "Bring me clean cloths, whiskey, and 2 flat pieces of wood from the kindling pile," she commanded. The men accustomed to taking orders from Blackwoods hesitated, but Caelan's voice cut through the air like a whip. "You heard her now." They scrambled to obey. Amelia knelt by the boy, speaking to him in a low, soothing voice. She cleaned the area around the break, then had the boy's father hold him tight. "This is going to hurt more than anything you've ever felt," she told the boy, looking him straight in the eye. "But it will be over in a second. You must be brave." With a deep breath, she took the arm in her hands, and with a swift, sickening crunch, set the bone. The boy screamed, then fainted. Working quickly, Amelia poured whiskey over the wound as an antiseptic, then expertly splintered the arm with the wood and cloth. By the time she was done, a crowd had gathered, including Ronan and Isabella. The ranch hands looked at her with a newfound respect. The boy's mother was weeping again, but this time with gratitude, clutching Amelia's hand. Ronan watched the entire scene, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. This display of skill had only cemented his decision. She was more valuable than he had even imagined. But Isabella saw something different. She saw Amelia earning the one thing Isabella craved, and could never truly command the genuine respect of the Blackwood clan. Later that day, as Amelia walked back from the stables, Isabella cornered her by the water trough. "A clever little performance," Isabella hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Winning over the rabble with your parlor tricks." A boy was hurt. "I helped him," Amelia replied wearily. "You are becoming a problem that needs to be solved." Isabella continued, stepping so close, Amelia could smell her expensive French perfume. "Ronan may be blinded by your supposed gifts, but I see you for what you are. A parasite, and parasites need to be removed." She smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. "This is your only warning. Disappear. Go back to your mud hut, or I will make you wish that scorpion had found you instead of Caelan." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. Amelia knew it wasn't an empty one. She had healed a wound, but in doing so, she had created a new enemy, one far more venomous than any scorpion. And Kaelin, watching them from the porch of the main house, felt the fragile peace of his recovery shatter completely. He could no longer stand by. A choice was being forced upon him between the duty he had always known and the debt he could never repay. Isabella's threat settled over Amelia like a shroud. The gilded cage now had teeth. She saw danger in the shadows, malice in the sideways glances from the Thorne family's retainers who now swaggered around the ranch. She began to test the boundaries of her confinement, trying to walk towards the main gate one afternoon, only to be politely but firmly intercepted by 2 Blackwood guards. "Mr. Blackwood's orders, ma'am. For your safety." Her only solace was her work. Her small herb garden became her sanctuary. News of her successful healing of the stable boy had spread, and clan members began to approach her hesitantly at first. An old woman with aching joints, a young mother with a colicky baby, a ranch hand with a festering rope burn. Amelia helped them all her quiet competence, chipping away at their suspicion, replacing it with a grudging admiration. She was earning her place, not as the heir's decreed bride, but as a valued member of the community. This only deepened Isabella's fury. Kaelin saw the change. He saw the way his people were starting to look at Amelia, and he saw the fear that Isabella's open hostility was putting in her eyes. The conflict within him reached a boiling point. His life had been a straight, unbending road of duty, and Amelia had turned it into a confusing crossroads. He found his father in his study, a room of dark leather and cigar smoke. A map of their vast territories spread across a massive oak desk. "This has to stop," Kaelin said, his voice tight. "You cannot keep her here against her will." Ronan didn't look up from the map. He was marking the positions of McAllister patrols near their eastern border. "What I can and cannot do is my own concern. The girl is an asset. The matter is closed. She is a person, not a prize mare to be added to the Blackwood stock." Kaelin's voice rose a rare show of defiance. "And what of the Thorns? You spit on our agreement. You invite their anger for what a woman you want to keep as a pet healer." Ronan finally looked up, his grey eyes like chips of granite. "I do what is necessary for the survival of this family. A skill like hers, bound to us by blood and law, is worth more than 1,000 acres of thorn grazing land. Isabella is a political match. This girl, she is a matter of fate." "Fate doesn't give you the right to ruin her life," Kaelin shot back. "Or mine." He stormed out of the study. The argument unresolved, the chasm between him and his father, wider than ever. The situation came to a head a few days later. Amelia was in her garden, her back to the path tending to a row of feverfew. She was so absorbed in her work, she didn't hear the soft, slithering sound in the grass behind her until it was almost too late. It was Kaelin's shout that saved her. "Amelia, move!" She spun around just as a western diamondback rattlesnake, thick as a man's arm, coiled and struck its fangs, sinking into the space where her leg had been a second before. She scrambled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs, and saw the snake slithering away into the underbrush. It wasn't its presence that terrified her. Snakes were a part of the landscape. It was the fact that it had been so close, so silent. Rattlesnakes almost always gave a warning. Kaelin was there in an instant, a pistol in his hand, his face pale with shock and fury. "Did it get you?" he demanded, his hands checking her arms and legs. "No, I'm all right," she said, her voice trembling. But Kaelin was looking past her, his eyes fixed on the path. One of Isabella's men, a surly brute named Jensen, was standing there trying to look nonchalant, but his eyes were wide with panic. Kaelin had seen him. He had seen Jensen nudge the snake from a burlap sack onto the path behind Amelia. In 3 long strides, Kalen crossed the distance and slammed Jensen against the wall of the smokehouse. "Did she put you up to this?" Kalen roared, the barrel of his pistol pressed under Jensen's chin. "Did she order you to kill her?" The man stammered, his bravado gone. I was just supposed to scare her. Just a warning." The confession was all Kalen needed. He dragged the man across the compound, kicking open the main doors of the house and throwing him at the feet of Isabella and her father, who were taking tea in the grand parlor. "Your warning nearly got her killed." Kalen bellowed, his fury finally unleashed. Everyone in the house froze, drawn by the commotion. Ronan emerged from his study, his face a thundercloud. Isabella rose, trying to maintain her composure, but a flicker of fear showed in her eyes. "Kalen, darling, I have no idea what this ruffian is talking about." "Liar!" Kalen spat. "You threatened her. I saw you. And now you try to murder her with a snake in her own garden. This is your honor. This is the honor of the Thorne family." He turned to his father, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "I will not marry this woman. I will not bind my name to a family of cowards and assassins. The agreement is broken. Now, get them out of my house." It was an act of open rebellion, a public declaration of war. Silas Thorne spluttered with indignation, his face purple with rage. Isabella looked as though Kalen had struck her, her mask of civility finally cracking to reveal the seething hatred beneath. Ronan Blackwood looked at his son, and for the first time, he didn't see a boy living in his shadow. He saw an heir who had finally found his own voice, his own will. The cost would be high. The Thornes would become enemies. The McAllister threat would grow, but his son had made a choice. "Silas," Ronan said, his voice dangerously calm. "It appears my son has made his position clear. You and your family are no longer welcome here." As the Thornes gathered their things, their faces contorted with humiliation and rage, Isabella shot one last venomous look at Amelia. It was a promise of future vengeance. Amelia stood amidst the wreckage of the day, her hands still shaking. Kalen had defended her. He had protected her. He had chosen her over his duty, over his family's future. The bars of her gilded cage had just been broken, not by her own efforts, but by the man who had been its centerpiece. And as he walked towards her, his eyes filled with a raw, protective fire she'd never seen before, she realized the nature of her prison had changed entirely. She was no longer Ronan's captive. She was now Kalen's responsibility, and that felt infinitely more complicated and far more dangerous. The departure of the Thornes left a volatile vacuum at the Blackwood Ranch. The alliance was shattered, and word spread like wildfire through the territory. Silas Thorne, a proud and vindictive man, would not take such a public humiliation lying down. Whispers grew that he was meeting with the McAllisters, his family's old rivals, seeking a new alliance, one forged in their shared hatred of the Blackwoods. The threat that had once loomed on the horizon was now camped at their doorstep. Ronan Blackwood retreated into a grim strategic silence. He spent his days in his study, poring over maps and sending out riders to patrol their borders. He didn't speak of the broken betrothal, nor did he rescind his original decree about Amelia. He simply watched his mind, a fortress of calculation. Kalen, having finally taken a stand, seemed to stand taller. He took command of the ranch's defenses, his orders crisp and clear, earning him a new level of respect from the men. The battle for his future was no longer an internal one. It had spilled out into the open, and he was ready to face the consequences. His relationship with Amelia, however, was fraught with a new and powerful tension. The lines had been redrawn. He was no longer her reluctant captor. He was her public champion. The debt he owed her was now tangled with a fierce protective instinct that felt startlingly like affection. "You realize what you've done?" she said to him one evening as they stood on the porch watching the sunset. "You've likely started a war?" "She tried to kill you," he stated simply, as if that explained everything. "There are lines that cannot be crossed. That was one of them. It wasn't your fight." He turned to face her, his grey eyes intense in the fading light. "It became my fight the moment you decided to drag my half-dead body back to your cabin. You chose to get involved with me, Amelia. You just didn't know it yet." His words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Before she could respond, Ronan's voice cut through the twilight. "Kaelin, Amelia, my study. Now." The room was lit by a single lamp, casting long, dramatic shadows. Ronan stood before the cold fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. "The McAllisters have raided our eastern outpost," he said without preamble. "They were aided by Thorne's men. They took our repeating rifles and killed 2 of my guards. This is the price of your defiance, son." Kaelin's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "It is a price I will pay." "We will all pay it," Ronan corrected him. He then turned his gaze to Amelia, and his expression was unreadable. "I have been a fool. I thought I could command fate, bend it to my will like a river. I saw your skill and I saw a way to bind it to our family. I declared you a bride for my son, because I saw you as a valuable price." He paused, taking a deep, weary breath. "I was wrong. You are not a prize. You are a sign." Amelia and Kaelin exchanged a confused look. "My wife," Ronan began, his voice softening with a memory of pain. Kaelin's mother was a believer in the old ways. She once consulted a sire, a wise woman of the Papago tribe. The seer gave her a prophecy, one I dismissed as nonsense at the time. He walked to his desk and unlocked a small wooden box. From it he pulled a piece of yellowed parchment. She foretold that a day would come when the Blackwood heir would be struck down in the desert by a serpent in the dust. He would be at the gates of death, and our enemies would circle. She said his life and the future of our line would only be saved by a daughter of the dust, a healer with no clan of her own who could read the secrets of the earth. The seer said this woman would be the true bride of the Blackwood line, a union not of politics, but of destiny. She would heal more than just a man. She would heal the heart of the clan. He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled with a dawning, reluctant awe. "I thought it was a fairy tale, but you came. You saved him from the scorpion, a serpent in the dust. You are the woman from the prophecy." The revelation was stunning. Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. The random, chaotic events of the past weeks suddenly seemed to fall into a pattern, as if drawn by an unseen hand. "It changes nothing," Kaelin said firmly, stepping forward. "Prophecy or not, the choice must be hers. It must be ours." Ronan nodded slowly. "Yes, I see that now. My decree was born of arrogance. But the prophecy, it gives us a path. The Thornes and McAllisters believe we are weakened, divided. They will attack the main ranch within the week, thinking to break us once and for all." He looked at Amelia not as a commander, but as a leader seeking counsel. "You know this land better than any of us. You know its secrets. The plants, the paths, the hidden places. The prophecy says you will heal the clan's heart. Right now its heart is about to be ripped out." The weight of his words settled on her. She had wanted her freedom, her solitude, but she was now inextricably linked to the fate of these people, of this man who had risked everything for her. Isabella's snake had failed to kill her, but it had succeeded in forcing her hand. She could leave the Blackwoods to their fate, and hope the Thornes didn't hunt her down. Or she could stay. She could fight. She could embrace the unbelievable destiny that had found her in the dark. "There are canyons," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "To the south. Narrow, treacherous, easy to defend, and the bluffs are riddled with jimson weed and nightshade, a large enough dose in their water supply." She trailed off her healer's mind, already turning to weapons. Kaelan looked at her, a fierce pride in his eyes. Ronan saw it too. She was not just a healer. She was a warrior in her own right. The Daughter of the Dust had arrived, and the war for the Blackwood soul had just found its most unlikely general. The attack came 4 days later, just as Amelia had predicted. The combined forces of the McAllisters and the Thorns descended on the Blackwood Valley, not with subtlety, but with the arrogance of overwhelming numbers. Their plan was simple, a frontal assault to crush the main ranch and break the clan's spirit. But they weren't met with a terrified family, hunkered down for a siege. They were met with a ghost army. Following Amelia's counsel, Kaelan had moved the majority of their fighters into the narrow canyons she'd described. It was a classic choke point. The attackers, forced into a tight, disorganized column, were easy targets for the Blackwood riflemen perched on the canyon walls. The first wave of the assault was decimated. The second part of Amelia's plan was more insidious. Under the cover of darkness, she and a few trusted men had snuck into the enemy camp and tainted a secondary water barrel, not with lethal poison, but with a powerful concoction that brought on violent sickness and disorientation. Chaos erupted in the attackers' ranks as dozens of men were struck down with gut-wrenching cramps and delirium. The battle turned into a rout. The Thorn-McAllister alliance, built on greed and revenge, shattered under the pressure of a well-executed strategy. Silas Thorn and what was left of his forces fled utterly humiliated. The McAllisters were captured, their power in the territory broken for a generation. Amelia had not fired a single shot, but she had been the architect of the victory. She had used her intimate knowledge of the land, the very thing that had made her an outcast, to save the people who had taken her captive. As the sun rose on a victorious but weary Blackwood clan, they looked at her not as a witch or a stranger, but as their savior. In the aftermath, a new sense of order settled over the ranch. Ronan Blackwood, humbled and grateful, formally ceded day-to-day command of the clan's affairs to Kaelan. His son had been tested by fire and had emerged a true leader. That evening, as the clan celebrated their victory with a massive bonfire, Kaelan sought out Amelia. He found her standing by the corral, away from the noise, staring out at the mountains she knew so well. "They're calling you the Desert Dove," he said, his voice soft. "A sign of peace and a fierce protector." She gave a small, wry smile. "It's better than hedge witch." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of celebration, a distant backdrop to the quiet intimacy between them. The prophecy, the battle, the decrees of his father, all of it fell away, leaving only the two of them. "My father's decree was wrong," Kaelan began, turning to face her fully. "He tried to own you, to make you a possession of our clan. The prophecy, it might be true, it might not. But it doesn't matter. None of it gives me any right to you." He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "I am not Kaelan Blackwood, the heir demanding the bride that fate has chosen for him. I am just Kaelan, the man whose life you held in your hands in a tiny, dusty cabin. The man who would have died if you hadn't walked out your door that night." He gently took her hand, the hand of a healer with dirt under the nails and calluses on the palm. It was not the soft, manicured hand of Isabella Thorne. It was the hand of a survivor, a hand of immense strength. "My father declared you the clan's bride. he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm asking you, Amelia Clare, if you would choose to be my wife, to build a life here with me, not as payment for a debt or as the fulfillment of a prophecy, but because my life truly began the night I thought it was ending." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. She had fought for her freedom, her independence, her right to be left alone. She had railed against the cage they had tried to build around her. But here with this man, she didn't feel trapped. She felt seen. She felt chosen, not by fate or by a patriarch's command, but by a man who respected her strength and valued her for exactly who she was. "I was an outcast," she whispered. "I had nothing but my garden and my grief." "And now?" he asked. She looked around at the sprawling ranch, at the mountains that were no longer a barrier, but a backdrop, at the man standing before her, offering not a cage but a partnership. "Now," she said, a true radiant smile finally reaching her eyes, "I think I'm home." She squeezed his hand, her answer clear. The wedding that followed was not a political merger or a transactional decree. It was a celebration of two people who had found each other in the crucible of the desert, a union born not of a father's law, but of a warrior's choice and a healer's heart. And so the story of Amelia and Caelan became a legend whispered on the desert winds. It wasn't just a tale of a scorpion's bite or a father's decree. It became a story about how the greatest strengths can be forged in the deepest solitude, and how true honor isn't about paying debts, but about making choices. Amelia the outcast became the heart of the clan, and Caelan the heir became a leader worthy of her. Theirs was a love born from a desperate night, tested by jealousy and violence, and ultimately sealed not by prophecy, but by their own free will, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most unexpected path leads you exactly where you were always meant to be. If this story of love, honor, and defiance in the Old West captured your imagination, please help our channel grow. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe and ring that notification bell. We have so many more tales from the dusty trails to share with you, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for listening.